You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
I'd be listening to the mainstream media and just be left frustrated on how they covered these stories. They would completely ignore facts just to promote their own agenda. I said, man, I could do a better job than these fools. I should start my own show. So I did. Hey everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of Freedom Strips. My name is Keaton Tucker. I'm going to be your host today, and my guest today is a fairly frequent guest. Now, you've been on here 3 times. Is this your third one, or is this your fourth?
4, something like
that. I think
that.
It might be your fourth. I don't know.
Could be.
But I've got Jason back on here. I wanted to bring him on because he was texting me the other day, and he texted me a very simple question. He was like, hey, who's this Andrew Yang guy? Who is this? And it kind of makes sense because Andrew Yang on the surface level is he sounds like a very reasonable guy. He's obviously a very smart guy. He's an entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur. He's been involved in the business industry in New York for a long time. So he comes across as a very smart, knowledgeable, and really with the cast of Democratic candidates that they have out there, one of the ones that isn't exactly just spouting crazy ideas every other sentence. He just seems like a reasonable guy, but he does have some interesting positions he holds. So I figured we would just break those down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What was some of the things that what got Yang into your mind? Like, did you see?
But I think mostly for me, it's little clips, little video bits on social media for the most part, which is I think where most people end up getting their news at this point in America, which is both good and equally terrible. But I just kept seeing his face popping up, and more and more I was seeing a couple particular folks that I'm friends with that are either 100% libertarian or have more libertarian leanings, and even another individual who's very, very left, who also had mentioned, hey, this guy sounds like he might have some, some steam behind him and some decent ideas. So it kind of just got me thinking, okay, well, if a few people that I know and, respect as people have, somewhat similar opinions of at least that this guy isn't crazy, let me look into him. And I just never really actually looked in. And then I just kept seeing more and more videos. And one in particular was his closing remarks from one of the recent debates. And I think everything, it's been a couple weeks since I watched it, but most, if not everything, seemed pretty on point. And at the end of the video, all I could do was just kind of have a moment of silent clapping in my head of, okay, this could be a worthwhile candidate, but I don't know anything about him other than the social media clips. And of course, we all know that that's how we all get into trouble, is just paying attention to what social media sells us or advertising in general and not actually finding out. So coming to you and I'm saying, hey, buddy, you're much more informed. So why don't you help me out here?
Yeah, well, the thing about it's interesting that you said that, because it is true that Andrew Yang is getting a lot of attention from both sides of the political aisle.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who are generally right-leaning or mostly on the right that have talked about Yang favorably. Right. I know people who are on the left that talk about Yang favorably, and even those in the middle with independents and some libertarians have expressed favorable views towards Yang. Okay. And I think most of that is driven not from, and we'll break down some of his policy positions and mainly his UBI position. I don't think most of that is driven from his policy positions. It's mainly driven as like, hey, he just seems like a reasonable guy, because they have, with the likes of Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg up there. It's like, Pete Buttigieg plays the establishment young presidential candidate pretty well.
That's the kind of feel that I've gotten from him as well.
Yeah, very much just, cookie cutter establishment mouthpiece, essentially. He's like a young guy who's just any Democratic Democratic Party position that you would think Obama would have is what he has.
Yeah, that's the typical "this is your next president" kind of guy that you would see.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think he's a very dangerous candidate. Well, I think he's dangerous. No, he's not dangerous, but I think he has a very good chance of being a vice president.
Okay.
Someone picking him for vice president.
Okay.
Just because of that.
All right. Interesting.
But the thing about Andrew Yang is, again, like I was saying, he just seems like a reasonable guy. He's a nice guy. He doesn't go up on stage and talk about these crazy ideas of letting all these illegal immigrants in and paying for their health care and giving them all of these benefits in the welfare state and then guaranteeing them a job and all these different things. But his main position is going to be his UBI, which is the Universal Basic Income, where Yang, he calls it his freedom dividend. It's a universal basic income program that would give every person in the country $1,000 a month. And it would be funded in part by taxes on companies that would benefit mostly from automation. So this is something that most people don't think about, but automation is a big reason why really these blue collar workers are voting for someone like Trump. Sure. Trump understood that the worry of these blue collar workers, like, hey, we're losing our jobs to machines, and he wants to keep the coal industry going and all of these manufacturing industries going. Yeah, that require these labor. But the thing is those jobs are eventually going to go away due to automation. Yeah, and so people are trying to figure out solutions for this. But really, in my mind, instead of creating this universal basic income program where you give every person $1,000 a month to kind of, give them a boat to float in during the times where they're looking to transition from a job that they've had for 20 years into something else, or to keep them afloat as they're looking for another job to get. It's part of the thing where creative destruction is a thing. Yeah. And it's always been a thing. Yeah. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. Because, if we were dealing with this the way we were dealing with it back in like the horse and carriage buggy days, and the government would not allow creative destruction, we'd be still running around in horse and buggies. Yeah. But the thing about the universal basic income is, from my opinion, it just doesn't make sense. It's funded all through heavier taxes on companies and individuals. Okay. And, if you want to give every person $1,000 a month, cut the income tax. Yeah. Because that takes half of everyone's income nearly every year. Yeah. So, the government already takes taxes as a baseline from my income. Then they take taxes whenever I buy anything, for the most part. Mm-hmm. Then my retirement plans are taxed. Anytime you move funds around with 401ks or any other types of money market or things like that, there's usually taxes that are associated. There's so many innumerable taxes. Now they're just adding another tax to give everybody $1,000 a month. That tells me, it's an interesting way and thought to do it, but to me that says, okay, it's just kind of like raising the minimum wage. If you raise the minimum wage, even if we could somehow get the entire country on the same page, instead of like West Coast is more expensive, East Coast is less expensive for different living conditions.
Expenses. Yeah. Even if we could get everybody on the same page, which you can't, but let's say for, the experiment you could, even raising all the minimum wage to a quote livable wage, which I don't necessarily want to have that argument because
it's arbitrary.
It's very arbitrary. And living in the Southeast, I feel like, I lived on minimum wage easily when I was single and living on my own. And I had an okay apartment, not anything to be proud of, but like minimum wage is enough if you're not wasting your money. And I know that's such a broad generalization because there's always circumstances that somebody can point to and say, yeah, but you XYZ. So, but it seems like another tax I don't know. It doesn't seem. Is that a tax for like across the board? Is that for everybody?
No. So what it is it's a tax mainly on tech companies is what he wants to levy the tax on.
Okay,
and companies benefiting from automation. So those companies that are mainly benefiting from automation with machines making their products, he'd levy a heavier tax on those companies.
So it's taxing innovators for their innovation, which is the idea that we want to float everybody to a similar place so that innovation continues to happen, although you're going to tax the people that are doing the innovation.
Correct. And you were you were on the track of like saying, like comparing it to like something like the minimum wage, like raising the minimum wage. Well, what happens when you raise the wages?
Right.
You know, things get more expensive.
Always.
Companies do not pay taxes.
Right.
They pay taxes, but let me clarify.
You're right.
They pay taxes. Some don't. But they pay taxes, but they offset those costs with higher costs to their products.
Exactly.
So that's exactly what would happen here. These companies that he would levy the tax on would raise their costs, and it would have a negative effect on the economy.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it's also creating more and more tax revenue going into the IRS. Yeah. So let's go ahead and dive into Yang's policies here.
Okay.
On the jobs and economy, he obviously has his freedom dividend. We just talked about that. His UBI giving $1,000 per month to every American adult. Yang supports expanding the vocational and technological training for students and programs where the IRS would reimburse relocation expenses for people who have to find and move for new jobs. He also wants to, this isn't on here, but he also wants to expand the technical ability for the IRS to do like automated tax, like to automate your taxes.
So
and stuff.
This is a vicious circle.
And it's just like
we're gonna help this whole automation thing while also giving the IRS more capability to automate. So people at the IRS are going to lose their jobs.
Exactly. Oh. But they'll get $1,000 a month when they lose it.
So everything's okay, except they work in DC or wherever they work, which is way more expensive than where I live. So.
Yes. On taxes, Yang supports the United States introducing a 10% value-added tax on big corporations and enacting a 0.1% tax on financial transactions, and ending the carried interest investment loophole on capital gains. Oh, here this is. It wasn't on the previous section, but he also supports automatic income tax filing, modernizing the IRS to make it more efficient at processing taxes and making tax day a federal holiday. Because tax day is something to be celebrated.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay.
On healthcare, Yang supports implementing, of course, the Medicare for All style of healthcare, which would have Americans would receive publicly funded healthcare instead of relying on getting healthcare through their employers or through private insurance. On immigration, Yang supports a 18-year path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants without criminal records who have lived in the United States for long periods of time. Yang also wants to invest in new technology to help secure the U.S. southern border, expand funding for the Customs and Border Patrol, and reduce the backlog in the U.S. asylum and immigration courts. So this is interesting because this is sympathetic. I feel like people on the right would be kind of sympathetic to this because he also wants to expand funding for Customs and Border Patrol on the southern border.
It's very unusual for the left side.
Yes. I'm very much in favor of, I have no problem with it. These people talk about like open immigration and having these people come in. Mm-hmm. I have a very sympathetic view towards that. I think we actually free travel and free immigration is actually very good for the country. It's what's made the country so successful.
Yeah.
The problem with that is the giant welfare state that we have.
Exactly.
So that's why my view is like cut down on the welfare state, eliminate the welfare state, and then have free immigration. Like let people travel across the border, no problem. I mean, have them maybe do it like a Ellis Island style, where you check them for criminal records,
Sure,
and diseases and things like
right,
that.
Yeah, you have to have some form of check and balance to make sure that we're not just letting, which sounds funny to say it that way, but not just letting anybody into the country, because that's where you can have unfortunate situations. But I mean, you still have passport checks and things like that in any sort of travel, like that still needs to be in place, but have the actual immigration process, let that be, you can, you just have to apply for citizenship and do all those things that should happen anyway. And then, but then you're not living off the government just to come to our country and live for free, or live, not have to work very hard to live for free.
Right. And I think, there is an argument to be made where, I mean, not everyone that's coming across the country isn't working and just sitting on their butt. There's plenty of people in middle America and South America and the southern states that are sitting on their butt and collecting welfare checks and not working, and they are American citizens. So, I mean, you do have immigrants outworking American citizens today, and that's just, it is an unfortunate thing. So I think it's something to be rewarded with citizenship. And I think it should be, you should reward those that are coming here to work and to find a better future for their lives. So I think that this stance on immigration is someone that voted for Trump might be a little bit sympathetic to his view on immigration, which is a huge thing. Trump ran, I mean, immigration was his number one policy that he ran on.
It was polarizing. I mean,
it was
by definition, like there was no middle ground between the two candidates or the two parties. It was just either you wanted one or you wanted the other. It was just, which that's another lovely part of the two-party system in our country is there's no room for grays. There's only black or white.
Right. And it's even becoming
worst.
More so today, which you see on both sides, just kind of digging into their political ideas.
Yep.
On climate change, here we go. Climate change. Yang supports U.S. government investment in cutting-edge technologies that could slow down the pace of climate change, like carbon capture and geoengineering. Okay. He would end federal government subsidies and tax breaks for fossil fuel companies and tax carbon emissions. So I'm all for ending government subsidies and tax breaks for companies. Like that's another hand of the government getting into the
there shouldn't
the market.
Be tax breaks on anybody if there are taxes at all.
Picking winners and losers, that's what the government does. And that's why people have such a negative view towards quote unquote capitalism.
Yeah.
When what the system today is not capitalism. The government picks and chooses winners.
Yep.
Just like this. I mean, the government subsidizes some companies and taxes others. Yang has also been criticized for promoting a fatalistic view that climate change destruction is inevitable, saying at the second Democratic debate that the freedom dividend would help people move higher ground to avoid flooding. I was watching this debate. I did a cover of the debate on my show, but I didn't bring this up. But that was one of his things. He was like, they were talking about climate change, and he was like, yeah, it's probably already too late and flooding's going to happen. And so you're going to need to move to higher ground. And what would make it easier than $1,000 a month to help you move to higher ground?
I mean, on the surface of it, there's the validity of a statement like that, of saying, hey, like, I'm not even telling you how to spend your money, which, from a libertarian leaning, that's attractive. That, okay, if this is going to happen, which I don't think that's the greatest idea, but if it's going to happen, well, at least you can't tell me how to use my own money that the government's giving back to me.
Right.
Because it's still my money to begin with, because you took it from me with taxes.
Exactly. Well, they can always take it back, and is the thing.
Well,
and people will always, this is also a downfall of the UBI system, where if Yang gets in and implements this, it starts at $1,000 a month. But it is not going to end at $1,000 a month.
Right. I was going to say that earlier. There's always going to be, I mean, if it's a government program,
it's going to continue.
There's no end in sight.
Yes. It's going to go to $2,000 to $5,000 to $8,000 a month. And it's going to continue to climb, just like with anything. I mean, any government program does not stick to its original boundaries.
Well,
it always grows.
What the government taxes its citizenry, it will slowly and surely start grasping more of that percentage and using it for its own purposes, whether it's earmarks or just unmitigated government spending or whatever. But I mean, they're going to eventually start taxing higher percentages and not returning a similar amount to its citizenry. So if, they
just
start
as
off
they
with
do
1,000,
now.
yeah, I mean, let's say if it's $1,000 to every adult American in the US once a month, and they tax every tech company, just to simplify it, every tech company 10% of all their whatever, just to kind of make it super simple. I know it's not that simple. So if it starts at 1,000 for every citizen and 10% tax on the tech companies, 10 years from then, it could be $3,000 to every citizen and I don't know, 17%. I mean, I can't think of the math right off the top of my head, but there's an incongruency there that, the percentage increase is not accounting for all the money that's then going back to the citizens. So the government's just going to swell again. And then we're right back where we started.
Right. And then the government nationalizes those industries and just takes full control of of those industries. And eventually you will still be taxed and the government will just give you'll be essentially working for the government.
Well, and I think the day of the initial idea of let's put this 10% or however much the tax is on tech companies and companies that benefit from automation, those days will be short-lived. In the long history, if you're taking a long view of our both history and future history, in the long view, I think it'll be a very short amount of time if this goes into effect that it was just for those tech companies, the tax. It was just for those tech companies and companies that benefit from automation. Eventually it's going to be almost every kind of business, and then possibly every kind of business, and then also citizens themselves, because remember, this needs to be fair, and taxes are fair. Remember? No, I don't remember that being fair. So that's okay. So that's one big thing with UBI then that on the surface I didn't know about, but there's a lot there.
There is a lot there, just like with how they enacted the Patriot Act, right? Right after the Iraq or Afghanistan war. And they enacted the Patriot Act to give the government the right to spy on its citizens, and everyone got behind it because that was a time where people were scared and that something had
it's okay because happened. Already the terrorists have won, and that's how we let them win.
Right, and we need to protect you, and so you need to give us the power to survey you, and so they've taken full advantage of that and taken it to beyond its limits in the Patriot Act today. And so I see no difference in something like the Patriot Act being abused with this being abused. On guns, Andrew Yang's campaign website says he presents a detailed plan to create a new multi-tiered licensing system for firearms, similar to the different levels of automobile licenses. These would require universal background checks. It's a big no-no for me. Simply because, one, universal background checks is eventually, that's like the number one stepping stone to confiscation, because you have to know who has guns and where the guns are.
If you don't have a list, you can't take them back.
Right, exactly. So that's what universal background checks are. And then as far as comparing gun licenses to automobile licenses, the Constitution doesn't guarantee you a right to an automobile. It guarantees you a right to defend yourself. So that's a non-argument either. He would also introduce a federal weapons buyback program for those who would want to surrender their weapons.
Very small uptake on that one, Yang. Sorry.
Yang wants to create a uniform federal safety standard and incentivize gun manufacturers to innovate new gun safety technology. I think that's fine. New gun safety technology, the manufacturers can innovate however they want. But again, you're talking about the federal government getting it involved in business again and subsidizing companies to do something that they want them to do. Did you see, this wasn't part of I think the New Zealand gun buyback after they had the Christchurch shooting, they enacted that gun buyback program. It had less than a 5% success rate.
I saw something similar to that about that whole scenario around that same time, and I can't say I was surprised. The New Zealanders, aside from those who may make headlines kind of in in the more metropolitan areas. The majority of Kiwis, to my understanding, are pretty. I mean, they're pretty pro rights. Like they would be having similar conversations that you and I are having here. That, you know, yeah, they're all for the good of the whole, but also don't tell me what is good for me. Let me make that decision.
Yeah, I thought that was so hilarious, because you would see headlines about, you know, the number of guns that were bought back by New Zealand's government, and it was like, you know, several tens of thousands of guns that were bought back, but it wouldn't.
Which sounds impressive.
It sounds impressive on its face, but it would not list the you know, the percentage of guns that are out in New Zealand.
Right.
And so you would see those headlines with the tens of thousands of numbers of guns taken back, but they wouldn't list the actual percentage rate. And then you would actually go and dive into it and be like, oh, it had less than a 5% success rate.
Yeah, because everybody thinks, and you know, New Zealand is also marketed this way through both media and kind of, I think, incorrect perception, but everybody thinks New Zealand is this super teeny tiny speck of an island country. And yes, it is quite small comparative to almost every other island out there, and especially continents, but there's not nobody living there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, and especially out in the bush, there's a lot of people that live in the rural areas because that's what they prefer. That's how that country has come to be what it is. And that's also why that country is not largely developed in its landscape, which is, you know, I kind of think that's their major cultural export is scenes in Lord of the Rings style movies. But there's a reason, because most people they're not building huge cities, but there's so many people that live there. Yeah, that's the tens of thousands. That's a drop in the bucket compared to its actual amount of citizens.
Sure. And then I couldn't help but to think, like, so it had less than a 5% success rate in New Zealand.
Right.
Think of what the success rate it would have here.
Yeah. And they're in New Zealand, you know, they're a fractious, you know, population, just like we are here. And not everybody thinks one way or the other. But I think that, you know, yeah, you'd obviously have an even harder time here, because they're just, there's no way.
No, not at all. Moving on to Yang's position on foreign policy. So actually, his foreign policy, he hasn't explained too much about it in like the debates, but the things he's said is fairly good. Yang would embody a non-interventionist style foreign policy, saying on his campaign website that he would repeal the authorization for the use of military force, returning the power to declare war to Congress, which is a big one.
Yeah.
Seeing as how Congress hasn't declared war since 1941.
Yeah.
He also says that he would focus on strengthening America's relationships with its NATO allies and beef up the State Department's diplomacy efforts and outreach. I don't know about boosting up NATO. NATO's...
Yeah.
The thing about Trump, what's interesting about Trump is he says crazy things, but every once in a while he'll say something and it'll be absolutely true, but he won't know that he's saying something smart. Like
when you say enough things that are crazy, eventually the numbers work out that you'll at some point say something sane.
Yeah.
You just don't realize it.
when he first got into office and he was talking about NATO and how he was threatening to leave NATO, and because all these other countries weren't paying their fair share as far as like the military, like for the NATO military. He's like, why do we even have NATO? He's like, they're far too expensive, and the Cold War's over. Right? The Soviet Russia has been long gone since the 80s. And you're like, holy crap, yeah.
Wait,
NATO was created to combat Soviet Russia and the Communist Party, and I mean that's been over for decades now.
Yeah. Yep.
So and now all it's being used is it's constantly expanding further and further east, and which is why Russia's so aggressive on the Ukraine front, because the U.S. has been heavily involved in Ukraine, and that's right on their border. That's like as if they would them and half the world were enacting policies in Mexico or something, you know, enacting closer and closer to their border.
Yeah, of course we're gonna get skittish. We're not really sure what your end game is.
Yeah, and I don't care for Russia. I don't think they're their leadership is very great, but at the same time, I mean, all we're doing is we have a hammer, a very, very large hammer, and all we can do is look for a nail.
Right.
But that is a kind of overview of Yang's policies.
Okay.
Did that kind of answer some of your questions on like who Yang is?
I think so.
He's a very personable guy, like as far as like on the debates, although in the middle of all those crazy people, it's very easy to look like a rational, sane person.
That's true. Yeah. One thing I did appreciate, it was at the very top of his closing remarks on that last video that I watched of him, that he kind of opened up with, I'm asking myself the same question. What am I still doing here? You know, just, you know, it kind of speaking to the audience. I'm sure you're all asking the same question I am. How am I still on this stage? That immediately kind of endeared him to me. Just because he's, you know, one, on a purely just, you know, kind of psychological, emotional level, he puts out a very good face. And I don't mean that in the political, you know, like he looks like a Kennedy kind of way, but in the, like, he's actually comporting himself as a normal human being. Like he's letting his face show emotion in reactions. He lets himself kind of chuckle at his own self. You know, I mean, he's kind of self-disparaging, which I would imagine, I can only imagine, is like a cardinal rule of politics, is never be self-disparaging. You know, whether you're on the campaign trail or in any form of office, local or higher, you know, like you always have to put out the view that you're the best. And, you know, he's actually seeming like, oh, okay, yeah, he gets it. Like we're all kind of here with this, and we're all witnessing the same craziness that is the modern media circus. One thing, and I didn't ask about this before, I would guess you would know, is the pin that he wears all over the place. Is that an acronym, or is he a proponent for math? Because I see it like on most of his videos, he's got a little lapel pin or something similar that says math. And I don't know, is like, okay, is he saying like we need to get better in the STEM programs in our schools, or is this an acronym for something? I don't actually know what that's about.
I know he's very big on like universal education for like the kids and everything. He wants to enact that, but I know that that's kind of his thing, is he says he's done the math or whatever.
Okay.
And
so it's more of like his slogan kind of thing.
Kind of. Okay. From what I gather, I may be completely wrong about this, but I know that he has in the debates, he's kind of done jokes at himself. He's like, I'm Asian, I'm good at math.
Right.
He's like, I did.
That was also in the back of my mind of, okay, like this is a little on the nose. Is he doing it, you know, kind of self-awareness sort of thing?
He has.
Okay.
And he's even done that in the debate, and it got in the Democratic debate, you know, people, I'm sure, were like kind of looking around like, are we allowed to laugh?
Yeah. Right. But, yes. It's okay to laugh when someone else makes the joke about themselves.
Yes. So he's made that joke before. And I think that's kind of what he's trying to do is get across that point of like, hey, you know, I'm good at what I do, and I say that this is a good idea.
Okay, interesting.
So yeah, Andrew Yang, what I appreciate him probably the most, what I appreciate about him the most is he's not afraid to talk to the other side. Like he's done interviews with Fox News. He's done interviews with Ben Shapiro, a lot of right-leaning guys. He's done interviews with libertarians.
Okay.
He's not one of those Democrats that are like, I'm not talking to Fox News.
Right.
I'm not talking to any right-leaning organization or right-leaning person.
Right.
He's not afraid to discuss ideas. Probably my favorite interview actually is his interview with Ben Shapiro.
Okay.
You know, my buddy Matt Bell always makes fun of me because I always trash on Ben Shapiro, but I actually enjoy some of what Ben Shapiro has to say, and I thought his interview with Andrew Yang was actually very good.
Okay,
it was on the Sunday special that Ben Shapiro does, and that was a great interview to show you how genuine Yang is to talk to the other side, because he genuinely wants to talk about ideas. Cool. He's not anti-right or anti-left. He's just kind of like, I don't know. He seems more of like an independent than a
That's
Democrat.
what it sounds like. I think with some of the UBI and a couple of the other things in and around
His Medicare
there,
for All position is very much in line with their party. But
yeah, I think maybe that's why he's kind of at a certain level of like quote core, kind of identifying as Democrat. But yeah, that's kind of the stuff that I had seen on social and just hearing, broad, just kind of comments from people here and there led me to think that. And then now, from with you going through, a lot of his policies, that it seems like he's way more, close to center than he is one side or the other.
He very much is. And he's one of two candidates that have attacked the Democratic Party while on the debate stage.
Okay.
And that was him and Tulsi Gabbard have both attacked the Democratic Party as part of the problem as well.
Yeah.
Which is why I think the Democratic Party is afraid of both Yang and Gabbard.
Yeah.
Because, they can't have people attacking the party like that and shedding light on the problems that they have caused. And they're afraid of an independent run from either one of these two.
Sure.
That could take votes away from a potential candidate to go against Trump and basically guarantee Trump 2020.
Yeah.
So it's all very interesting. Okay. A new poll has come out that has Andrew Yang overtaking Pete Buttigieg as the fourth most favored candidate.
Well, his name is way more pronounceable.
Yes. So Andrew Yang has overtaken Pete Buttigieg as the fourth most favored candidate, which is huge because Yang came into this thing as nobody knew him.
Yeah.
And that is a huge mountain to climb for someone who no one knows to get all the way up to the fourth most favored candidate than it is for
seemingly out of nowhere.
You being a senator and some people know your name, some people don't. It's just like,
how old is he? Roughly. Late 30s, early 40s?
I mean, I can find out right now. Let's see.
Because that tells me even if he doesn't make the long play for this election, because being fourth is definitely no guarantee of making it much higher than that. But man, if he doesn't make it through this election season, then I mean, if he stays in the public eye, that could be, he could actually he could put himself in a good place for the next election.
Yeah.
That could be interesting. Especially since he seems to be one of, if not the youngest candidate out there that I've seen.
He's 44. Buttigieg is the youngest.
Okay.
But he is fairly young.
Okay.
So he is 44.
Wow. Yeah, that's very young for a presidential candidate. I think Obama.
I mean, aside from like Joe
age.
Biden, like Joe Biden would be, his first day in office would be the oldest a president has ever been in office.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders as well. Like they're both super old.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren, they're all old.
Yeah. Which
old.
I'm,
which
I'm not
the Democrats
foolish enough to say, only young people have the right ideas. I mean, the longer you're around, the more perspective you have. That's definitely true. But, at the same time, every now and then it's not a bad idea to have the fresh air of a younger candidate. I mean, I know, like I was saying a minute ago, I mean, Obama was fairly young when he was first elected.
Yeah.
Comparatively.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bill Clinton was as well, but aside from
Kennedy was one of the youngest.
Right. Well, and I meant more in like more recent presidencies, but yeah, like, the typical age I would say is more late 50s, probably early 60s. At least that's the impression.
Yeah.
Of course we could run the numbers and I could definitely be wrong, but when I can't say you, but when I think of American politics on the big stage, quote unquote, the presidential stuff, it's the usual comment and idea that you hear from a lot of folks is it's all the old men. And now that more ladies are coming into politics too, or in the eye of the media, at least, because they've always been in politics, it's like all these old people. And that's the impression. But now we're starting to see some more youthful candidates get the coverage, and I think that's a big difference. Is he's like with Andrew Yang here, I mean, 44, in the political scape, that's actually pretty darn young to be making a play for president. Usually it doesn't start until another 5-10 years. So that he might have some legs on him. That might be interesting.
I mean, that's the thing that the Democrats always scream is it's like old white men are in control of the country.
Yeah.
It's just like, I think Dave Smith made this point before. He was like, he said something along the lines of, these people complain about old white men and that more women need to be in leadership roles in politics. And he's like, well, it's all done by votes.
Right.
Right. So you guys are the one putting these people in there. Yeah. He's like, if you want more women, then women need to vote for women. Yeah. It's like the women are the largest voting bloc in the country.
Right.
They could easily put a woman in there if they wanted to. Definitely. However, the woman that's at the greatest chance of becoming president is Elizabeth Warren, who pretended to be a Native American.
Right.
And boy, that's another story, is how far Elizabeth Warren has fallen. Yeah. I really thought it's not out of the way yet, but she was surging, and I thought for sure she was going to become the nominee.
Yeah.
But ever since she released her healthcare plan, she has completely nosedived.
Yeah.
And that's been quite the story for me to follow, is just to see Elizabeth Warren just go down in flames the way she has. She did not do very well in the last debate. Andrew Yang actually did really well in that last debate. Which I think you're going to see him. I mean, he's already surging. He's surged over Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
And come closer to February, boy, you might see him challenging Elizabeth Warren, which would be incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Well, anything else on Yang you want to talk about before we move on?
I think that's a pretty good picture. I know much more about him now than I did coming in, so that's good.
Definitely my second favorite of the Democratic nominees. Gabbard being my first, and she still has the bad ideas that Yang does on just about every other.
Okay. So they both
policy.
have the same bad ideas, but in general.
Well, the only reason I give Gabbard the leg up is because she's so good on the war and intervention area.
Yeah. Okay.
Speaking of war and intervention, probably the most underreported story of the last decade, I feel like. And the reason why it's been so underreported is because of the stupid impeachment mess.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, yes, that's a big story. Like, Trump is
he's
third.
A peach.
He's the third. He's the third president to ever be impeached. Like that is a big story.
So he's not the president anymore, right?
Right.
That's
you wouldn't think so.
That is my favorite thing about anytime anybody talks about
Twitter
anybody that's like not actually, intelligent about these things.
There was a frightening number of people that thought on Twitter that
impeach the president. So you want to take him to court. No, I want him out of office. Okay, so you want to impeach the president, then have the rest of the process say, yes, he should no longer be. Impeachment doesn't mean anything because it still has to be approved by a Republican majority.
Gosh,
and that is currently there.
Yes, and this is the thing, is like there was a frightening number of people that thought Trump was out of office because he got impeached. Yep. No, he was impeached in the House.
Right.
And what the House has to do is send the articles of impeachment to the Senate, which, funnily enough, they have not done.
Yeah.
So it was so urgent to impeach Donald Trump, but it is not urgent enough to send the articles of impeachment to the Senate.
Well, plus the people that are so vocal, not in the political sphere, but in the cultural sphere, because it's popular to hate whoever is the president. I don't care who's president. There's always going to be a very large segment of the population that loves to just hate whoever's there.
Yes.
But yeah, that they are failing to address the fact that, okay, so if Donald Trump is no longer president, let's see, who becomes president? Oh, that's right. The vice president becomes president after that. Who's the vice president again?
Oh, yeah, that would be that hardcore Christian Mike Pence.
Oh, shoot. That's right. Let's just leave Trump in for another few months, I guess.
Yeah. There's a video circulating. There's a video circulating of this lady went to this pride parade or something like that, and was holding up a impeach Donald Trump.
Okay.
And she would go up to different people, and they were like, she would ask them, "Do you want to impeach Donald Trump?" They're like, "Yeah, get him out of office. He needs to go." And she's like, "Yeah, impeach Donald Trump." They're like, "Yeah," and she's like, "Yay, President Pence." And they go, "What?
What?" Yeah, it's not the two of them being impeached. It's the one person that's at fault.
And what was so funny is because she was at a pride parade.
Yeah.
And, you know, with Mike Pence with his
Yay,
very
President Pence. That's great.
Yeah, she's go, "Yay, President Pence," and they go like, "No, wait,
what?
hold on. What am I? That's what happens.
Yeah,
that's what happens. Mike Pence goes into and
not paying
steps
attention
into the presidency.
Economics and national politics classes that we had in elementary and middle school.
Yes.
Oh,
but this impeachment mess has just been dominating the news headlines, and it's so. I haven't been covering it much because I find it so. Honestly, it's so it's exhausting, but it's so boring.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's so boring because it's such a. They impeached him for abuse of power.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? If you've been paying attention to the last 20 years, think about all the impeachable acts that have been done in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. And this phone call, God, it's just so stupid.
Yeah, it's so strange to me that this one, and again, I mean, you know me and your listeners, you know, if they've listened to the last, you know, few times I've been on, that, you know, you guys know I'm not the most informed politically, but I do try to keep up, and obviously I'm friends with Keaton, so, you know, I stay pretty well informed, at least to a moderate degree. But it's, out of all the things, even if we're just talking culturally, not even, you know, with the law or politically, but just culturally, of all the things that he could be blamed for, true or not, but of all the things that have been rumored or talked about, of everything, it's that phone call. And yeah, you know, there's things about the phone call that are a little weird, but that's the thing. Right. Oh, we got him on this. That's the one. It's like, that's kind of almost not the least of our worries, but I mean, that I would have thought they would have latched onto any number of things prior to that. But I think that's because there was tangible evidence of some sort. Maybe they thought that was the one way they could do it.
I don't know. I honestly feel like Nancy Pelosi was almost cornered by her party to pursue it.
I agree.
Because she didn't pursue it before, and she said that she wouldn't, and then...
Because it's not worthwhile.
Yeah.
Anytime a president has been impeached, nothing has happened.
It's
and
divided
granted, one
the
of the
country,
times, you know, Nixon resigned, and that was a different era, that, you know, if you're going to be accused of something, it's better to go out on your own terms, which, you know, okay, sure, whatever, one way or the other. But, you know, it's a different era now. But yeah, like that is the biggest thing, and I can't remember who said it. It might have been a comedian at some point, but it was within the last handful of years, and it was somebody on the public stage that, you know, they were talking about, you know, the current president and all these different things, and somebody yelled out, "Impeach him!" And it got a good laugh from the crowd and a few, you know, hoots and hollers. And whoever the guy was, it kills me that I can't remember, but he was like, you know, yeah, we should totally do that. But you guys know, like, we have never successfully impeached a president in the sense of no president has ever been unseated.
Right.
With the exception, and I don't say this in a, you know, a condescending or a bad, you know, in a jerk way, but with the exception of Kennedy, that is the only president that has been unseated in a sense. And that depends on your thoughts on that.
Right.
You know, but it makes very little sense unless it's cut and dry and it's something so egregious and outlandish that the entire country agrees on it. There's almost no point to impeachment.
Right. And it
does tell the history books that yes, we stood up for something, but at the end of the day, the victor tells history.
God, you stood up for something so stupid.
Yeah.
But the thing is like you have so much to get Donald Trump on, and that's what they pursue it. It's just, it's so boring and laughable.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're not sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate because they said they won't get a fair trial.
Right. Yep.
It's like a fair trial. The court system doesn't declare a fair trial for the prosecutor.
Right.
It's for the accused.
Right.
So, I mean, if the Republicans aren't going to go with your articles of impeachment and unseat him, then make a better case or impeach him for something that the Republicans can get on board for.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
it's all stupid.
Yeah. And it's definitely overshadowed everything else in the media, just as it just did on this podcast. So let's actually jump back, because there is something that's come up that I actually don't know anything about. And as soon as you texted me about it, I knew this was going to be a great topic for the show in addition to Yang. So I was like, okay, I'm going to let Keaton tell me all about this. And I'm just going to be educated here. So here we go.
So this is the story I want to talk about is the Afghanistan Papers. So
is that like the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah.
No.
In a way. Yeah,
no. Oh, okay.
No, I mean, they were found by the Washington Post and pursued by the Washington Post. Essentially what it was a report done by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko. So in 2014, he launched what was called a Lessons Learned project, where they interviewed over 600 people with firsthand experience in the Afghanistan war. And this was people all the way at the top, like generals, from people all the way down to the bottom who were boots on the ground in Afghanistan.
Okay.
And the Washington Post got a hold of all of these interviews and published them on December the 9th. So what this was they published a 2,000-page report that showed the American public was lied to and misled about the Afghanistan war. Mm-hmm. U.S. officials constantly said that they were making progress when they were not, and they knew that they weren't.
Yeah.
3 successive administrations have been involved in these blatant lies about how the war was going and what progress was being made. The Bush administration, Obama administration, and now following into the Trump administration. It's absolutely incredible. I encourage all of you to go take a look at the Washington Post report on the Afghanistan Papers. That's what they did. They lied about casualty numbers. They lied about progress being made in the war. They lied about the reasoning why we were there in the first place.
Yeah.
And that root of uncertainty and the reasoning for the war took a root all the way up at the top, where generals, they had interviews here where generals couldn't even understand the reasoning of why they were there.
Yeah.
They couldn't agree on a central plan to win the war. They couldn't agree on what the war was for. Some wanted to create a democratic government in Afghanistan. Some wanted to create a more friendly environment towards rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. Some wanted to create it as a place where American influence could be used in the region against Iran and everywhere else.
Okay.
And so this was across the board with the generals and those high up in command. A person identified only as a senior National Security Council official said, there was constant pressure from the Obama White House and Pentagon to produce figures to show the troop surge of 2009 to 2011 was working, despite hard evidence to the contrary. He said, quote, "It was impossible to create good metrics. We tried using troop numbers trained, violence levels, control of territory, and none of it painted an accurate picture," the senior National Security Council official told government interviewers in 2016. Wow. Quote, "The metrics were always manipulated for the duration of the war." Even when casualty counts and other figures looked bad, the senior National Security Council official said the White House and Pentagon would spin them to the point of absurdity. Suicide bombings in Kabul were portrayed as a sign of the Taliban's desperation, that the insurgents were too weak to engage in direct combat. Meanwhile, a rise in U.S. troop deaths was cited as proof that American forces were taking the fight to the enemy. I mean, this is something where it's difficult because like those that were always cynics of the war, kind of like saying that like, you know, since the beginning that this war was a bad idea, that they didn't have a clear plan to go in. And the thing about the Afghanistan war is it was something that was almost justified at first because of the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
And the Taliban had obviously due to the intelligence at the time, they said the Taliban had been dug into Afghanistan, which is the reason why they wanted to go in and start the war there. And that's who they declared war against. They didn't declare war against Afghanistan. They declared them against the terrorist organization Al Qaeda that did it.
That's why we've been all over creation fighting this so-called war, because you can't fight one enemy when it's not one particular place.
Well, and as time has gone on, and I've talked about this many times on my show about Ron Paul talks about blowback and how as the war has drawn on, your troop presence in an area doesn't help your cause, because you see the people living there and like kids. So you take it as a perspective of a kid gets his village blown up. Parents are killed from an airstrike, and he sees American planes and American tanks there. And so you've just created 6 more insurgents from these kids with their family being killed. And so you take out a village with 2 leaders and 16 more pop up.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's blowback, is because you're creating more destruction towards yourself than you're taking care of.
Yep.
I thought it would be interesting to go over the estimated losses in the war. So since 2001, an estimated 157,000 people have been killed in the war in Afghanistan. 64,000 Afghan security forces, 43,000 Afghan civilians, 42,000 Taliban fighters and other insurgents, 3,800 U.S. contractors, 2,300 U.S. military personnel, 1,000 NATO and coalition troops, 400 humanitarian workers, and 67 journalists and media workers.
Good night.
All of this for an area that has more Taliban than when we began the war in Afghanistan.
Not to mention the rest of other...
and expanded into
cells.
Iraq.
Well, and other named cells that have grown out of, this entire conflict, that now it's no longer just one named terrorist cell. There's half a dozen or more now. Right.
It's such a damning document for the entire war.
Yeah.
And it is hard to read, because you see from Donald Rumsfeld to different military generals to troops on the ground, you can read this Washington Post report, and they have clips of these quotes from their interviews.
Yeah.
And it's hard to read, because you have people like Mike Flynn, a 3-star general, say, you see the reports saying we're doing such a good job in the area. And he's like, if we're doing such a good job, why does it feel like we're losing?
Yeah.
And it's because they were losing, and they've always been losing.
Yeah. There's no way to win that. You can't win against ideology.
No, you can't. And the thing about this is, I was actually telling this to my wife earlier. The whole thing, and this, I'll probably spend a whole episode on this. I need to do my notes on this, on the Middle East and with Osama bin Laden and everything. So Osama bin Laden, when he carried out the attacks on 9/11, he knew that it would provoke an attack.
Of course.
On him.
That's the point.
He knew that the United States would respond. And the reason why he set up shop in Afghanistan, and the reason why he provoked the United States the way he did, is one of the reasons he launched the attacks on 9/11 was because of troop presence in Saudi Arabia and the sanctions levied against Iraq that killed tens of thousands of children.
Mm-hmm.
But he knew that if he leveraged the United States into a war in Afghanistan, then that would financially weaken and just completely drain the American populace.
Yeah.
And the reason he knew that is because he fought in the war that Afghanistan fought with Soviet Russia.
Mm.
So at that time, in the 60s and 70s, the Soviet Russia and the USSR, they were doing fairly well at the time, or so reports showed.
Sure.
And America was getting just bogged down in Vietnam. It was an endless stream of money and U.S. military personnel for a war that accomplished virtually nothing.
Yeah, it was the bucket with the hole in the bottom.
Yes. And so America and the CIA said, we need Soviet Russia to have their own Vietnam, or else this is going to be bad. So they enticed Russia to go into Afghanistan and start the war there. And the CIA trained the Mujahideen. Mm-hmm. Osama bin Laden was part of the Mujahideen at the time, and so they trained him to fight a war in Afghanistan. And so Russia sent over 1 million men to Afghanistan. They accomplished nothing. They got bogged down. They spent billions and billions of dollars in Afghanistan and got nowhere. Yeah, they were just bogged down in this conflict with the Mujahideen and these religious fighters. So Osama bin Laden used the same tactic that the CIA in America taught him, to lead a superpower into an area to get into an unwinnable conflict. Yeah. And that's exactly what we've been doing for 20 years, and it's accomplished nothing. Yeah. And they've lied about the results in these papers. This is like when they released the Pentagon Papers with the Vietnam War. Yeah. All the lies that were spread about the Vietnam War. And at that time, it was so celebrated about the whistleblowers. And then this story with the Afghanistan Papers gets no coverage. Yeah. I've seen nobody on the mainstream media talk about this other than I think Tucker Carlson talked about it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why Tucker Carlson is the only one allowed to talk about things that actually matter, but that's what it seems like. I cover him a lot, but he's right on a lot of things. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's he's right on a lot of the things about that matter. But I thought it was such an important thing that people should know. If you haven't read the Afghanistan Papers yet, the Washington Post released a report kind of summarizing it, but it's a 2,000-page declassified document that with all these thousands of interviews. They have them all available for you. If you wanted to dig through them, you can. Right. But just the summarization is just... it's something that everyone needs to read. Yeah. So, yeah. Everyone should read them. This is essentially what I'm saying. Yeah. Everyone should read the Afghanistan Papers, and please let people know that haven't listened. Maybe you may have some people like Jason that hasn't even heard of them because of all this impeachment mess and all these other, the 5-second news cycle.
Yeah, I think I saw one blip on my radar that, around early November, and you said it was dropped on the 9th.
It was, I think it was released on it was on the 9th.
Yeah, I not that I can remember back that far because I've slept since then, but I do remember seeing maybe 1 or 2 very small mentions, and it was literally just a headline, and it was kind of one of those pieces that was not much more than a headline anyway. Yeah. And, just kind of a, RSS feed, a news feed, whatever, that was just mentioning it. And I haven't seen, thinking through just daily news and things like that. Daily news podcasts that cover just kind of everything, and then just the internet of news every day. I don't think I've seen much more mention than those 1 or 2 times very early on.
And it's so sad because this is one of the biggest stories in the last few decades. I mean, honestly, this is a war that's going on for nearly 20 years now. Yeah. This war is almost able to drink. and it's got kids fighting in this war that are younger than the war itself. And the reports of these people lying about the results and knowing that it's an unwinnable war, and they've made no progress whatsoever, and spinning these reports to say that we're actually doing well when we're not.
Yep. Yeah. It was one thing when the public outcry from the U.S. was against Vietnam, because it was just, there was no circumstance that we could quote win, or at least just, in a positive way extricate ourselves, because we shouldn't have been there in the first place. And this is so very much the same, different circumstances, but the same thing. And there is, outcry about it in a certain sense, but nothing like it was in the Vietnam era.
No,
and it's
not at all.
I think it's because it comes down to it. The war on terror has been conflated with patriotism so ubiquitously that if you're in a group of friends or family, I know, like, if I was at my house with my parents and I was to say something along the lines of, we should not be in the Middle East. My parents, who I love and respect, and they are both retired Navy chiefs, like 100% love and respect for our military. But I think, there would probably be some side eyes or some negative comments if I were to say something like that, because, and it's nothing against either, my folks or anybody that has kind of been, cowed isn't necessarily the right word, but kind of been brought into that thinking of, this is the engagement that we're in, and it's our patriotic duty to continue it until it's done. Well, when every single person involved recognizes that there is no logistical end to a conflict like this, it's just like Vietnam. And I'm with the folks that are patriotic, because Lord knows I love this country.
Yeah.
And I support our military. But I also think that, we are so far in above our heads, because it's hard for me to say that we shouldn't have gone there in the first place, because there had to be some kind of reaction to the attacks on 9/11.
Yes.
But
right.
Because things were sold with a false bill to begin with, and the American public, which will never ever be told in any, possible war or political scenario with another country, we're never told the full story.
Right.
Especially on the onset, because what sells is, this happened, we have to react.
Yeah.
Yes or no.
Right.
That's the media coverage, and that's what is put out in front of the public. It's so sad that, it's hard hearing those numbers.
Yeah. Well, the thing is,
people that have been killed in
millions displaced too. It doesn't go through the millions and millions of people that were displaced from their homes and were turned into refugees and had to move to different countries because of the war taking place in their country.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, almost nobody says that the war, going to war against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, wasn't a justifiable war. That was 100% a justifiable war for what happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
What most people that are against the war now are against is what the war turned into.
Yes.
That's what they're against.
Yeah.
And it is hard to talk to people who are, because you are absolutely right that the war on terror and really all of these wars, if you challenge any of the wars, then it's almost like you're challenging the military, or you're challenging patriotism, or like, patriotism is such a bastardized term even today, because like, who are you pledging allegiance to? The government?
Right.
That's who you're pledging allegiance to.
Yeah. You're screwed if you're pledging allegiance to a government of any sort.
Yeah.
Even if it's one that you are a part of, like, you think of anybody that is in the seat of power. If you're pledging allegiance even to your own particular party that is in power at a given time, and you're the ones that are holding or handing out any matter of justice or whatever's happening, there's bound to be something that comes along and will, in some respect, destroy your faith in that system.
Yeah.
Because you can't give your life over to that. Now, having patriotism in the sense of standing up for your country and for the
rights held in that country.
Exactly. The way of life that we have been blessed with in this country, and I don't say blessed in the religious sense, but just in a broad sense, like, all of our founding documents, flawed as they may be, were pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And
they got us this far.
They were a hell of a lot better than a whole lot of other countries that, in the history of the world, we're a baby of a country, but we've also done a lot better for ourselves in certain regards, and others would not so well, but, we're also still here.
Yeah. And we've done something that has never been done in the world before.
Yeah. This experiment is still working.
Yeah. Even though it's being challenged by the growing government that we have, the largest government in the world, and the largest government the world has ever seen in documented history.
Which is most of the problem in our country, that people, again, conflate patriotism with believing in the government. I'm not going to believe in anything that's so big that I can't wrap my head around the entire scope of it.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
No. It's a mess, but I just think the Afghanistan papers are such a important story that was completely blown over in the mainstream media. And it makes sense because they're in the war propaganda.
Yep.
That's their whole business.
For sure.
Is the mouthpiece of the government.
Yep.
But Jason, thank you for coming on, my friend. We've reached our time limit, but this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of shedding some light on one of the more publicized and popular presidential candidates, and obviously the Afghanistan Papers. Those are both two things I didn't really have too much knowledge about today coming in. So that's awesome. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. If you have not liked us on Facebook, please do so. We are located on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you can find podcasts. See you on the next episode, everybody. Peace.